Okay. Okay. For this one with Dr. Perry, it was on chapter 4. So it says on page 89, Dr. Perry describes the brain as a historical organ, not only because it contains our own history, but also because it contains insight into how our caregivers were parented, so how we were raised, and then how we parent is directly influenced by how we were raised. How will this influence how you will parent in the future, and how can this knowledge help families who might have had their own experiences of trauma and neglect? Um, so I don't have any kids, but I do have divorced parents, and I do have like my dad is not exactly like he's very much I go to him for business advice and very professional related stuff, like not really emotional. That's never been something with my dad. And so I guess just thinking about that, I've never like experienced trauma, like seriously damaging like trauma, thankfully. But I guess the worst thing would be like my parents' divorce. It's not pretty. It's been like 10 years and they still hate each other. So like moving forward, if that does happen to me, I don't want my kids to be in the middle because I was placed in the middle, and I want, I guess, the competition to like never exist because my parents bicker, and when we were younger it was bad, but now I'm older, so I kind of just like, guys, stop. But just knowing how that affected me is definitely going to influence how I parent in the future. And I know I say that now and it may change, but my whole kind of how you were saying, like this new generation is going to raise kids so much differently. There's so much more transparency, so much more like love, and like a different type of love where like they want, there's no, I don't know. It's just like it's different. And I can see it in the kids that I babysit and just like newer kids and stuff. And it gives me hope. And so like I want to contribute to that hope with no trauma, no neglect. So yeah.
No, I mean, I don't know you well, but I think you'd be awesome. Like, I don't see you as one of those like closet crazy people, but who knows? I don't know. But I mean, I can speak for myself. Unfortunately, I have had a lot of trauma as a child, but I think the biggest thing for me is honestly knowledge. And I tell my kids this all the time. Like, I know, you think I'm a nerd because I love to read books. I'm like, but because books give you so much insight. And I try and like, explain a lot of the different things that I learned to them and like break it down. Like,
Mhm.
um, I hope it was in this class and not my other one, but there was only because I took this in human stress, but I think it might have been this one where it was called mirroring neurons. And to me, I kind of related that to, you know, if one of your friends is like in a funk, and I mean like just in a funk, you feel like the negative when they
Yeah.
walk in the room. You feel it, and there's something called mirroring neurons where you start to actually act like them and feel like them. So whenever, you're in a funk, like I always try to stay away from, whoever it might be. Like I just need that time to myself.
Yeah.
And my biggest thing is like I just try explaining to my kids, like, grandpa and grandma were a lot different because a lot of times that my daughter, she's 13 now,
Yeah.
13 going on 17 at this moment. Her initial reaction is like, well, why? What did grandma do? Or what did grandpa do? Did they make you do this? Did they let you, or did they not let you go to anyone's friend's house, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, they did. They let me go over to my friend's house. And I'm like, when you're ready for that conversation, we can have it. I go, but there's a reason why I don't let you do that. I said, I've
Yeah.
had friends who were raped by my friend's father. And that's just something I honestly, I don't, at the end of the day, I don't trust anybody. I don't trust family. I don't trust anybody aside from like my mother and very few people. Like I don't
Yeah.
know people like that. And that's my biggest thing is I am a much more strict parent, but I'm very honest with my children and why I do the things that I do. Because as a child, for me, I was always told because I said so,
Yeah.
but I almost felt like I was super defiant because I didn't get a response. It was like,
There's no
because I
reason.
said so. To me, that's no reasoning. But I
Yeah.
tell my kids, there's a reasoning for it. And I try and break it down in a way that's not so traumatic, especially for my boys, because they're a little bit younger. My
Yeah.
youngest boy is 7. And I always tell them, I'm like, look, Bobby, the easiest way for me to explain it is there are going to be people that you think are nice and they're not. There are very, very bad people in the world. And that's who I'm trying to keep you away from. Like, I know you might think that, oh no, like I don't, me
Yeah.
talking to someone online playing Roblox is the end of the world. No, it is because there's crazy people who will say, hey, give me your address or where do you live by? I go and then it starts bigger conversations. And I'm just honest with them. I'm like, there's mean people in the world who take children and who hurt children. I go, and that's the reason for me being so cautious of, yes, you can go to your friend's house, but I'm going to meet their parent and I'm going to stay there. And every time that they hang out, I'm going to push for them coming over here. I will talk
Yeah.
to any parent. I will tell them exactly what we're doing. I will be very transparent with them because my thing is, I would much rather them come to my house.
Hmm.
Obviously, my daughter's getting a little bit older, but once I've met parents and kind of
Yeah.
spent time with them, because that's the thing is like, I don't really know anyone. And that's the biggest difference for me is explaining to my children why I do certain things and
Hmm.
then why I'm changing it. Because my daughter's biggest thing is like, well, grandma didn't do that. Grandma said that she let you do this and let you do that. And I'm like, yeah, and guess what, girlie? I had you at 19. There was a reason why I'm keeping you behind. Like, I'm like,
Yeah.
and I'm very honest with her. I'm like, I've made, decisions and choices that I regret. I go, but at the end of the day, it brought me you, and it
Yeah.
is what it is. But that's just why I'm so strict because I've seen the world
Yeah.
when grandma and grandpa raised me, it's much more different now. And when they were being raised, a lot of the issues weren't around. And child
Times
trafficking,
different.
yes, it existed, but it really wasn't as just widespread and so
Yeah.
easily. Like, and I think that's just the biggest thing. Like, us millennials, more of us are, graduating, college and getting that education and, taking your general ed, you learn a lot of different things. And hopefully more people do take child education classes just to see like, oh, dang, like,
Yeah.
maybe I won't have kids, but I also won't, traumatize the next little kid that I see at a bus
Yeah.
stop or something, like
Yeah.
I just feel like it's not something that's wide known. And if more people knew, more people would take action and, protect the babies and just having them having a normal life. And that's how, I've tried to raise them and continue to try to raise them is just being like nurturing, caring, obviously, strict and thorough and when I need to be. But my biggest thing is just explaining it to them so they understand why I do the things that I do and why, you know, we are raising them the way that we are.
Yeah. And like you said, like times are changing. Like the way that our parents or like grandparents or whatever were raised is so different. Technology has grown like so much, and that's just like it's so easy to like connect, but it's also so easy to be like traumatized. So
Yeah.
that's a really good point. Um, Kind of leads into the second video, which was about okay, it doesn't lead in, it kind of does, but like about neglect, how
Yeah.
poverty of experience disrupts development. And so Dr. Perry says that what neglected children need is quantities of quality interactions. And the question to us is, what does this mean? Why is it important? And how can we ensure this happens in profession or career in our lives? Um, that is really important. I think you always hear the expression like quality over quantity, but if you can have as many good quality conversations, obviously you want to have that because that just leads into consistency and that like background knowledge that your kids are going to be supported and that they always feel comfortable because yes, you want those quality conversations and interactions to happen, but in order to build consistency and trust and an environment of support, it needs to be consistent and there needs to be a lot of them. And then, but it also still needs to be very good in terms of quality. Can't just be like, hey, it needs to be like empathetic and just like confidence boosting and engaging and really, I guess, deep in some moments. So, um, I guess, I mean, my career doesn't really make sense, but I don't really run into many kids. When I do serve tables and stuff, I'll like draw like something on their kids' menu or talk to them, get down low on their level. It's not really related to that, but that's how I interact with kids sometimes. But yeah.
No, I think that's cute because I'm a big fan of, you never know what someone's going through. And my biggest thing is any kind of interaction with honestly anyone, whether it's a random person or a random child, like I would much rather be that nicer person because I don't know what people are going through.
Yeah.
And I kind of relate quality over quantity for a lot of things in life. You get what you pay for is kind of what I relate it to, like, the quality of your your clothes. If you pay a little bit less, you can get more, but it's not the quality that you want. And similar to friends, like I have a very small group of friends, but I can call them legitimate friends because I feel like they're the quality they need, not the quantity, but the quality.
Yeah.
And having that in a child's life at a very young and very susceptible, like developmental age is just so crucial because if you just have someone who doesn't care to have any kind of conversations or like, oh, I'm just watching you, so here's an iPad or here's a
Yeah.
TV, they're really not getting anything. It's not helping
On
anyone. Like, yeah, they're not, you know, traumatizing them, but they're also not helping them develop their brain and,
it's like
giving
a
some
type
of
of
that like
almost. Yeah.
exactly. And they're not getting that like what is it, serve and
Return.
return and serve. And
Yeah.
that's the thing is you want those kind of interactions because that's what helps children kind of
Yeah.
build their brain and understand and problem solve. And I just think that it is very crucial. And the way I guess I would ensure that it happens in my profession or my career, I mean obviously not my profession right now, but my goal is to be a social worker. And I
Mhm.
think just honestly just continuing with what I'm doing right now, like
Yeah.
just being open, patient, listening to children, listening to, their families too, and understanding like their background. And, I think a lot of what happens now and a lot of the traumatic that we're seeing is still that like generational trauma. And I'm just hoping that, with the next generation,
Yeah.
hopefully, most of us or a lot of us learn not necessarily our lessons, but learn from, our past and our upbringings. Like I definitely learned and been like, you know what, I'm not going to put my kids through that. Like I could have easily been like, like I wasn't that bad. And I know people like that, which, I try to be, or I say it in a nicer way, like, well, maybe if you just,
Change.
listen to them or, speak a little bit softer. Like I think I always, when I try and like approach certain people about them kind of being like, in my opinion, mean to their children, obviously I can't tell someone how to raise them. I
Yeah.
just kind of make it in a way where like, well, how would you feel? Like, I remember my husband wasn't always on the same page, but because he would always kind of be like, well, what did you learn this week? And I'm like, I learned really good information. And I kind of like use a reverse psychology on him. I'm like, well, what did your parents tell you when you were younger that you didn't care for? And he's like, sorry, professor, like he was like that I was a piece of shit. And I'm like, okay, so is that how you wanted to remember your childhood? And he's like, no. And I'm like, so when you yell at the kids, is that how you want to be remembered? As
Yeah.
you yelling at them or you having a conversation with them, maybe not being happy with them, but been able to have a conversation. He was just like, well, when you say it like that, and I said, well, that's just me educating you. That's
Yeah.
me saying like there's different ways to do this. Like I'm not perfect. We're both not perfect, but hey, like let's try something different. We do
Yeah.
words of affirmation in the morning and my kids aren't perfect. They still misbehave, but my biggest thing is I try to just teach them like, well, this is why you shouldn't make choices like this because this is the
Yeah.
repercussions and understanding the reasoning in their choices and that they make the choices at the end of the day. Nobody else is in charge of their body but themselves. So
Yeah.
they're always like, yes, mom, I'm in charge of my body and I make my own choices. And as
Yeah.
much as they like do the whole roll eye, like it was a little affirming because a couple of weeks ago, my youngest, not who has, I guess, more of a rambunctious personality,
Mhm.
even his after school care taker at LA's Best was like, he's been a lot different. She was like, he has hiccups. She goes, but he comes up to me and says, Miss, I know I shouldn't have did that. And tomorrow I'm going to make a better choice and I'm going to work on that. And before he was very like, he would put his eyes down. I'd be like, what happened, Poppy? I made a bad choice. And I'm like, that's okay. Like, what are we going to do tomorrow? Make better choices. But now like
Yeah.
it's still happening, but he's like, Mom, I got in trouble today. And I'm like, what happened? Like, why are you so excited? He's like, because I talked to Miss and we have a plan. I wrote down what I'm going to do tomorrow, what I'm going to be better at. And I was like, oh, I said, well,
Yeah.
excuse me. Like, let me just check out because you don't need me anymore. Right. And he was just like, no, I just figured I'd tell you, just in case she
Yeah.
told you. I was like, oh, okay. I was like, all right, smooth talker. I was like, cool, 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 cool.
See, like, but that's so good. Like, you're creating such a good positive reinforcement for them that, like, they are, like, obviously they're conscious of what they're saying, but, like, it is so comfortable for them to remember what they've done and they're not scared to make mistakes. And that's so good. Like, so good. Like, I'm so excited for the new kids because they're going to be, I
Believe
don't
me,
want
girl,
to see
it
them
took a
miserable
lot
people.
of time. It took a
Yeah.
lot of time, but you know what? From
It's worth
everything
it.
that I've learned, it's you just have to. You can't,
Yeah.
change a traumatic event that, whether it's years of stuff that I probably shouldn't have been saying to them. Like, I know that it's going to take time. And my thing is, I'm just patient with them. Every day I know it's a different day. So I always tell them the same things. And sometimes I have poopy days too. So I'm just like,
Yeah.
y'all, not
We're
today, not
human.
today.
That that
Uh,
actually is a great lead way into our next question about how, for chapter 8, how our impression of ourself and our world is created by other people and how this impacts our understanding of the future. And then it poses the question, are we stuck with those early, it says maps, but like ways? And so like you just mentioned, like you can't change the past. You can obviously evolve and fix things and change the way you think. But those early, I guess, fundamental moments, like those first experiences or those significant experiences, you can't change. And I think in the book, he kind of was just discussing that other interactions with our lives, not necessarily like parents and stuff, but people you interact with on the daily basis can really form what you think is going to happen in the future. So like how you mentioned like I want to make sure every baby is okay and like every time I encounter a child, I'm not going to give them a like if they spill something on my shirt, I don't know, like in the park or something. Like you can make a conscious decision to traumatize them or move on and teach them a moment and that's going to be remembered and maybe it'll even change the parents how they do it. But that like map is what you're developing and it can't really be changed. And so I personally think that we're stuck with those early maps, but there's like if something comes up, you go to your early map that was developed, but then with learning and growth, you can make a change in that moment to decide something different. Like you'll still be remembered. You'll still remember that moment. I'm like getting lost in what I'm trying to say. Like you'll always
no,
remember, but
mhm.
like you can make a conscious effort to try to change that. But yeah.
Yeah, I get what you mean. I think what you're trying to say is like no matter what, you live that experience. It's never
Yeah.
going to go away, but it's not going to shape who you are for the rest of your
Mhm.
life. And I
Yeah.
think that's like the core thing that we're learning about risk and resilience, right? Like, can we get past all of the adverse and all of the trauma that we've been through to change our map and change who we are? And I think we can. But like you say, like you said, I don't think it necessarily goes away, but I think it's just something that, even though like I think the saying is like, oh well, everything you've gone through is made you who you are today. And it's like,
Yeah.
yes, but it's also the external factors in my environment who made me who I was.
Yeah.
I didn't choose to live in the ghetto. Like I didn't choose to grow
Yeah.
up, poor, but that's just how my environment was. And I
Mhm.
was able to get like I was able to be resilient because my I guess thing was a child was like, oh, like I just got to get out of this poop hole and like
Yeah.
become something one day. And then once, I got pregnant, it was more of a shift of, I just got to make sure that, my children know that they're loved and I do as much as
Yeah.
I can for them. Like as much as I hate to like add to that cliche, but like my babies are my world.
True.
Like if
Yeah.
I didn't have them, like I probably would be a different person, but I hope
Mhm.
I wouldn't be a jerk to kids. But I think that, our maps are almost like a stepping stone of, our building blocks on who we become to be. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, sometimes, when we have negative support systems around us, it's not looking great. It's not a positive outcome. But my biggest thing is like even if it's a smaller interaction with a child of just like um normally like when I'm in line at a Target and sometimes like there's kids in front of me or like there's a kid that's like yanking on his mom's arm and he's like yelling and like I'll make eye contact and I'll like make a stupid face and
Yeah.
they'll kind of be like what the heck, but then like they're just like, oh, okay, like maybe I'm being a little dramatic. So like I just try to make my interactions with just like randos like just
Yeah.
more, I guess, more nice, and just like
Yeah.
if I see a mom struggling or if I see a parent in general struggling, like if they drop something, I'm like the first one to be like, oh, well, hold on, wait, like here
Yeah.
you go, like, or here you dropped your phone. Like my biggest thing is just I wish I had that for me. So even if it's a small glimpse into someone else's life, I'd rather be remembered of like, oh, there was this cool lady earlier that, I
Yeah.
dropped my phone and she gave it back to me. Like, normally people in this neighborhood would just take it, but she didn't, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of just how I see it.
Yeah, and like you're in a way you're kind of like breaking the cycle if of at least your life, but maybe their life too. Like maybe that's just like a huge mental break for them, and it'll just contribute to their map and help them grow. Um, I know we're running really short on time, but this video actually was really interesting to me about violence in children. I
Mhm.
picked the question that kind of was asking us a question at the same time where he was like she was like Dr. Perry states that blank is one of the best predictors for someone breaking the cycle of violence. And watching the video, it was I thought it was literacy. Is that what you also got?
Um,
There was a few.
no.
He said like a
Well,
few things, but I picked literate, like being literate as really important. And just like learning. And it reminded me of our conversation last or like 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago about how like your kids were on break and one of them like was couldn't think or something and you were like, we're gonna start reading more. And it's just
use
like,
it or lose it.
yeah, use it or lose it. And it's like it gives them something to do, but it also like it it literally does like make you smarter because you read more words, you like are exercising your brain. And maybe that's not the exact answer to the question, but that was one of the things that he mentioned, like people trying to become less violent mostly get into reading or something like that. So, but it reminded me of our conversation last week.
Why I think it's interesting because we all see our different perspectives. And I wouldn't say that your answer is wrong, but I do think that with some of the videos, he does give like a broad kind of
Yeah.
answer where it could be a multitude things. So when I saw it, I took that he stated either like support or relationships kind of being
Mhm.
the best predictors. Because when you think about it, obviously, if you're around like negative support systems or like abusers, that kind of predicts how, either the violence starts or, that individual starts violence as well. Like
Mhm.
similar to Tina, like her thing was, she was sexually abused. And,
Yeah.
I've always personally had this like negative stigma before taking a lot of these classes of like, well, if someone was raped, like why would they go out and like be, promiscuous,
Yeah.
but that was just me being naive. Like, it's not necessarily that that's what they choose to do. It's just what's safe for them. It's something that
Yeah.
they know how to, react to. And I
Mhm.
think that relates to it is, sometimes when we have those negative support systems and that's all that we see, we then just perpetuate that to someone, either someone else or to
Yeah.
ourselves. So if you have that around you, then, you know, that's pretty much what you're doing as well. You're just continuing it on.
Yeah. Yeah. I do remember him saying the relationships part. I was going more specific, but I do agree, like, relationships are so important and just like knowing that you're supported in like at least one aspect of your life, whether that's family,
Yeah.
friends, or school or whatever. But yeah, it's definitely important. Um, since we're like pushing an hour, I'm gonna do this last question just really fast. It
Oh yeah,
was
take good.
about Leon's case, so it's the same book as the first question with Tina, but just kind of going over like what happened with that and if we thought that there was a responsibility for either his mom or him kind of for how he grew up and then how what he did with like the murder. But I personally think it's like not necessarily 50-50 but like a shared responsibility. He shouldn't have been neglected and his childhood obviously wasn't the best, but he also shouldn't have killed people. So um I mean, I think that just really shows that like where Tina, she was abused sexually, and so her inappropriate behavior was almost related to that, like sexually misbehaving,
Mhm.
where Leon's upbringing wasn't necessarily like related to what he did, but it's like it shows just how like a path can go that way or it can go a completely different way like it's so unpredictable based on childhood trauma. Um yeah.
Yeah, and I think it really did raise awareness on, how we quote unquote treat these people who, create or who, commit these heinous acts.
Hmm.
Um, and that's the thing is, what we're learning is when you neglect a child at such a vital state, developmental stage of their lives for
Hmm.
such a long time, there's a lot to undo. And unfortunately, I feel like to a certain extent, there's only so much someone can do because like um Dr. Perry like talks about in many chapters of the books is he, does home visits. He calls the schools. He even goes to classrooms and tries to explain, this is why, your classmate might be a little bit odd, but don't
Yeah.
treat them that way. Because that's the biggest thing is it's not only their support system and their medical providers, whether that be psychiatrists or whoever they're doing their therapy with, but also their environment. There's only so much that you can control unless they're homeschooled and they don't go anywhere. Then that I can make that kind of make sense. But
Yeah.
for Leon specifically, I think 100% goes back to his parents. I think that a lot of the development just wasn't there, and a lot of his, prefrontal cortex and his frontal lobe
Yeah.
wasn't able to develop in the way that it was. And
Uh,
unfortunately, when it doesn't develop, you just can't make those decisions accurately. Like he's like in my mind just stuck, and not necessarily at like an adolescence age, but because that didn't develop, there's only one way it could have gone, if that
yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. Like he just
But
reacts immediately and there's nothing to calm him down. Like no
but it
long.
kind of like yeah, but it also for me like it connects to like the jail system and prisons. So obviously like the first reaction like, oh, someone committed murder, let's throw them in jail for the rest of their lives. Yes, but my biggest thing is like, well, are they learning anything? And how do we expect people that are doing time in prison to be better if all we're doing is caging them when we know,
Mhm.
statistically and all of the evidence, whether it be, mind, body, and, development, that's not what someone needs. What they
Yeah.
need is kind of like getting to the stem of the problem and understanding the trauma to be a better person. But a lot of times, they get locked up and they have no sort of either support system going in, or they don't have either the funds or the coverage. And I know like certain jails are a little bit different, but
Yeah.
a lot of them aren't like therapy based. Their biggest thing is punishment based, which by all means, of course, yes, people do
Yeah.
make bad decisions. And there are some that, their frontal lobes were developed. They're just jerks. And
Yeah.
I guess that's kind of where it gets gray, where,
Yeah.
okay, so do you just treat everybody the same? But at the same instance, I'd be curious to see what the statistics are like, for people who are, in prison statistically, like how many of them have an ACEs score like higher than 4, which,
Yeah.
would kind of answer why they make or the choices that they do is because they just it didn't develop either all the way, or sometimes it's just how unfortunately how you were raised. And if people
Yeah.
around you are making bad decisions, whether it be sexually
Mhm.
violence, they just consider that the norm. And unfortunately for Leon, like it didn't go right. Like that was one of the stories where I was like, oh, like that didn't
That's
go where I thought it was going.
yeah, no, same. Yeah, it just like that's what I really like about this class is it really goes down to like when you're born. Like your childhood, you cannot change that. And it just really like it reinforces how important it is to have people grow up, not necessarily like correctly, but like just there's so many ways to avoid these instances that can prevent such like tragic things in the future. And so I really do like this class and what we're reading. It is a lot, but it's so important and it really has
Yeah,
been eye-opening. So,
yeah, I
um,
know.
well, that was our last question. So we're good. We have one more, but yeah, I'm gonna stop the recording.